So this morning I'm talking about the fourth portion of the Tao Te Ching, the way in its power, and I'm maybe giving us half dozen talks. I don't know. I've talked about 3 already, and here's what I'm going to be talking about. The 10,000 things arise together. In their arising is their declining. They flower and return to their root. Returning to the root is serenity, not stumbling and confusion and sorrow. When you realize who you are, you accept what is. Patient, amused, and embracing, dignified as a king. Following the Tao, you accept whatever life brings, and when death comes, you are ready. So last time, my last talk, I talked a little bit about the first stanza. The 10,000 things arise together. In their arising, it's their decline. They fall and return to their root. So this is the natural rhythm of life. Starting to get dark, starts to get dark, we naturally turn more inward. And I think it's not coincidental that we have our long retreats and our fall practice period. Well, of course, we have a spring practice period too. But our long retreats bookend our practice period. 7 days in December, 5 days just in a couple of weeks. Returning to the stillness that we find in darkness. And then, of course, things get light again. That's wonderful too. And this seems to be a dark time for our country and our world. A dark time. And we wonder, is for our species, which is not doing such a good job of things, is it going to get light again? And for other species who are dependent on us, we don't know. So that's hard for us. The 10,000 things arise together, and their arising is their declining. They flower and return to their root. But regardless of what happens, how much ebb and flow there is, we're rooted in something deep and spacious that brings joy, and that is not a thing. It's not a thing. And that's what Lao Tzu says to us over and over again. Returning to the root is serenity. And that's our practice in Zen. Even if we don't feel it, even if we think we're returning to cluttered mind, we'll be here together, we're returning to the root. Not stumbling in confusion and sorrow. When you realize you are, you accept what is. In the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of climate change, in the middle of racial turmoil, distrust of police distrust of other people. It seems like since 2001, I read this recently, in 2001, we become gradually more tribal every year. So now the divide between the two tribes, however you want to divide up our country, has become huge, a huge gap. How could they be anti-vaxxers? How could they not believe in climate change? How could they not see the police are prejudiced? And the other side says that about back and forth. This tribalism is too bad. One nation indivisible. Do you remember having to recite that? One nation indivisible. But that's basic Buddhism, indivisible. Just this tiny, insignificant guy here who's in pain and part of a tribe, however you want to define your own tribe, and yet the whole universe is reflected in me and supporting me. That's the core teaching. So when Fazang, the Huayan teacher, was working with the Empress Wu, who was very despondent about lots of things, he gave her this teaching. And then she wanted a demonstration. Here's the demonstration. I haven't read this demonstration in a few years. Fazang placed 8 large mirrors at the 8 points of the compass. 2 more mirrors, one on the ceiling and one on the floor. A candle was suspended from the ceiling in the center of the room. He lit the candle. The Empress cried, "How marvelous, how beautiful." Fazang said, "See, Your Majesty, this demonstrates the relationship of the one and the many, of each of us in the entire universe. Watch, Your Majesty, how each mirror not only reflects the one flame in the center, each mirror also reflects the reflections of the flame in all the other mirrors until an infinite number of flames fills them. All these reflections are mutually identical. In a sense, they're interchangeable. In another sense, each one exists individually." When the master covered one of the infinite number of reflections of the flame and showed how each apparently insignificant speck affects the whole organism of our world. So just a tiny insignificant speck, and yet all reality is here. And we could just be with that. We could just be with that. We could just return to the root, right within our pain. We're free from pain. We're just here. We're just here. No stumbling and confusion and sorrow. When you realize who you are, you accept what is. When you realize who you are, you accept what is. Patient, amused, embracing. Patient, patient. My second teacher had the name Dainin Katagiri. It means great patience, Katagiri. He didn't like to talk about the name, but he was really patient. And once I spilled soup on him in a formal retreat when I was as a servant. I was really embarrassed. I rushed afterwards to his room. He said, "Oh, no big deal." He did say no big deal, even though he picked up some of our colloquials. "No big deal." He said, "Just make effort. You make good effort. Just make effort." Then I said, "Well, I know I'm kind of awkward in the Zendo when you ordained me. Maybe I should do some exercises, Tai Chi or something." "No, just make effort." So just make effort to return to this simple serenity that's right here. Just make effort, but not too much effort. Tao Te Ching warns about making too much effort. Wu Wei, doing non-doing, effortless. Because if you make too much, your head gets all big. When you realize who you are, you accept what is, patient, amused, embracing, kind-hearted as a grandmother. No, he was kind-hearted as a grandmother at that moment. And I had one of my own grandmothers that I talked about before, who was patient, amused, and embracing. I had another grandmother. Luckily, I had 2 grandmothers who were, in a way, I was close to, but my other one was just amused. And amused is okay, but for a little child, we want some patience and some embracing, not just amusement. And my grandfather, so here he's patient, amused, embracing, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. Dignified as a king. And that was one of my grandfathers. One of my grandfathers, who was a retired engineer, sat in his chair in the living room every day, really with a straight back, and didn't just sat kind of like, Jeremy's sitting right now, only without a mask on. And I was afraid to approach him because he looked so dignified. I said to my sister, well, he's kind of scary. She said, no, just go sit in his lap. He's not scary. And a while ago, a couple of years ago, I talked to a bunch of people who are members of Common Ground. And they said, oh, coming over to your Zen center is hard. It's scary. Everybody just sits straight and looks ahead. Nobody moves. Nobody says anything. And I thought, well, that's dignity. I didn't say that. That's dignity. I said, all you have to do is approach someone who's dignified, and if they're sitting still and erect and open, they'll be loving, they'll be generous. They just will be. You just have to take that little risk. Following the Tao, you accept whatever life brings, and when death comes, you are ready. So I want to spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes just on this one. Following the Tao, you accept whatever life brings, and when death comes, you are ready. So the two pioneers in Taoism are Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, which I've been doing, and Chuang-Tzu, who came out 100 years or so later and kind of, what can we say, extended Lao Tzu's teaching. Extended. So when Chuang-Tzu was dying, his disciples wanted to give him a lavish funeral. Chuang-Tzu said, oh, I have heaven and earth for my outer and inner coffin, the sun and moon for my pair of jade discs, the stars for my pearls, the myriad creatures for my farewell presents. Is anything missing from my funeral paraphernalia? What will you add to these? Master, we're afraid that the crows and the kites will eat you. Above ground, I will be eaten by the crows and the kites. Below ground, I'll be eaten by the ants and the mole crickets. You rob the one of them to give to the other. How come you like them so much better? So when death comes, he's showing us how to be ready. How to be ready. I'm not, there are a lot of things that I'm not very good at. My posture has never been that good. But nobody straightens my posture anymore. Ever since I became guiding teacher, nobody straightens my posture, but it's never been very good. And I'm not a Buddhist scholar at all. And I'm a lousy administrator. I'm really a lousy administrator. Poorly organized, forgetful, awkward and ritual. May not seem awkward to some of you, but I have a history of being very awkward and ritual. But the ability that I developed over these years, I guess, if I developed it, is learning how to die. Without even trying, I know pretty well how to die. How to die. Just maybe it's hours of meditation practice. I'll just let go and be here and be here and be here. Well, I guess that's a skill. And we'll see if it serves me well when at the very time of when I leave my body, or if I go, yikes. I thought I was good at this, yikes. We'll see. We'll see. We don't know. We don't know. So how do we develop the ability to accept whatever life brings? And when death comes, be ready. Be ready. Well, I'm going to suggest, other than meditation, which of course is central, finding a purpose, radically accepting what is, laughing, opening our hearts. So, finding a purpose. So when I was not quite 21, I went through a really hard time. And fortunately and unfortunately, I read all the existentials. I will say that didn't help me. I remember very well reading Albert Camus. He opens his book, The Stranger. My mother died today, or maybe it was yesterday. I don't really remember when. And the whole book is about that. The angst about death. And so I became kind of haunted by death. And my purpose then, a purpose I developed, was to use meditation to see if I could tap into some kind of peace that was beyond the duality of me and you, life and death, sky and earth. And that became a purpose that propelled me for a long, long time. Then I got married and had another purpose, to be there with my wife and then have kids. And those purposes, having a purpose helps us. A lot of people during the pandemic feel like there's no purpose anymore. If you can find something that's really deep for you, meaningful for you, it will help you. You won't need to be haunted by the pandemic, haunted by this cultural division that's going on. So then when I was 40, as I've said many times, my brother, who was 30, killed himself in a regional treatment center in California in a locked ward. And again, I became haunted by death, by his death. Haunted by someone else's death, it means you're haunted by your own death. Became haunted by death. But I found a purpose, little by little. It took a while. A lot of sitting, a lot of anguish, a lot of fear. I was already a psychologist, and I have been working with people with mental illness for some time. So I thought, well, I'm going to try to develop some residences in Minnesota for people who are really in pain, so they won't get locked up, sent into hospitals, and end up with a much worse experience that they had than they had before. So I spent years doing that. So that's just me, But experiencing life fully means being engaged in things that matter to us, that we most deeply care about. And that reduces and even extinguishes fear of death. That's the first one. The second one, which we talk a lot about, is practice radical acceptance. When I started trying to develop crisis residences for people in severe mental health pain, I got nowhere because of the stigma. This is like 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. I don't know. Nowhere, the stigma. No one wanted to talk to me. Nobody wanted to give me money. But I just had to radically accept that and think, I'm going to do this anyway. And I lucked out because the culture began changing. Mental illness wasn't quite so scary anymore. You talk about your own depression, your mother's bipolar. So, but it happened very, very slowly, and it's still not gone. But if we really care about something deeply, we radically accept the contingencies that are all around. There are always contingencies. We just do it. We just do it. Reinhold Niebuhr said in 1932, God grant me the grace to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Many of you are 12-step people, I know. You recite that. I've never been a 12-step person, but in my men's group years ago, we began reciting it. And we did it. And for years, I think we forgot. But if you recite it routinely, that's one thing. But can you recite it as if your life depends on it? There are some things you can change, but there's some things you can't change. And can you just open up those things you can't change, acknowledge them, and work with the things you can. You can do that. You can do that. You can have that radical acceptance. It's not Stoicism as we know it today. It may be the Stoicism of Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, if I'm pronouncing his name right, but it's not what we think of when we think of Stoicism today. So anytime you have a harsh impression coming in your mind, can you say, oh, you're an impression. You're not the thing you appear to be. Can you look at it? Can you say, does this impression have to do with something that's up to me or something that's not up to me? And if it doesn't have anything to do with anything that you can change, can you say it's nothing to me? I could never learn to sit really straight. But finally, I just had to say it's nothing to me. I'm going to come here anyway. Nothing to me. My teachers didn't seem to mind. They supported me just the same. So accepting beyond the ego's habit of dividing the world into for me and against me. So a couple of years ago, I talked about my cousin Mary, who was run over by a bus in Duluth and had to have her leg amputated above the knee. I talked about her lightly. But she had a near-death experience. She had a near-death experience. And when I went up to visit her, she said, the person I used to be died. That Mary is dead, but that doesn't mean I am. She's been working on not 2 years, developing a new life. She's gotten a prosthetic leg. She had a lot of problems with it. She's working with it, doing her best. Something she can't change, but there are lots of things she can change. And she's very inspiring to me when I'm with her. And I think maybe I said this last year. We went in a talk last year. Last year we went up to see her. We actually go to see her quite a bit. We went to see her last year. It must have been before the pandemic. So I lose track of time. Is that 2 years ago before the pandemic? Wow. 2 years ago we went up to see her, and she'd just gotten her. She'd just gotten her first prosthetic leg. And so she said she wanted to go and walk in the rose garden in Duluth. And I didn't know Duluth had a rose garden. You know, the rose garden here. It's beautiful. I thought, Duluth, the rose garden? And the rose garden is right by the lake in Duluth. Those roses are tiny and they look cold. And the wind is blowing all the time. Well, we walked through the rose garden. And instead of just dashing through the rose garden the way I do this with this one, with Linda, look at that one, look at that one. We walked really slow because she had her prosthetic leg. Oh, it was wonderfully meditative. But there we were. And she seemed to have a wonderful time. And I said to her afterwards, I didn't know Duluth had a rose garden, Mary. And she said, I didn't either, even though I grew up there. So she didn't know. You see different things. You have different experiences when contingency really gets you, when something really gets you. If you could just be with it, you just radically accept it. So purpose, so meditation. Still talking about dying, you guys. I want to spend the rest of the time talking about God dying. Meditation for death, for letting go. Meditation. Purpose is important. Radical acceptance. Next one is humor. Humor. Like love, humor is an antidote to fear. It's an antidote to fear. Can we laugh at what terrifies us? We're in the grip of fear. It loosens if we laugh, if we really laugh. We laugh in life, laugh at death, and in the face of death. You can do that. And that's what Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu teach us to do. Especially Chuang-Tzu is always telling stories of that. All Lao Tzu did is write the Tao Te Ching. Chuang-Tzu is the one who told story upon story, most of which are pretty funny. So once when I was discouraged in my sitting, because I had been sitting, I think I had just done a week retreat, and it was like on a Monday or a Tuesday morning in San Francisco, and we bowed to my teacher on the way out, went through his office, and I said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He said, "Oh, yes." And I said, "Oh, well, can you give me a little more clearer instruction or advice about how to die to this obsessing, complaining little guy in here?" And he said, "No have time. Have to go play tennis with Betty." Come watch me play tennis. Yeah, so I don't have time. So I went out to the tennis court. I told this story, I think it's in my first book. So you guys have heard this story a lot of times. So I went out to the tennis court, and there he was with white shirt and a white sailor hat on, and a bald head, a white sailor hat, dressed in white. And he'd never played tennis before. And Betty was a tennis player. So I just watched, and I watched as they hit the ball back and forth, and as he stumbled around, hit it sometimes, laughed, fell down a couple of times, got up, laughed, hit it a few more times. And Betty really enjoyed it. She really enjoyed it. And they only played for 15 or 20 minutes, but it got in my first book. You can see why. Right? Not in my first book, or maybe my second. Laughter, and radical acceptance. I mean, he was radically accepting. He was a klutz in comparison with her. Just radically accepting, but still having a good time. Klutzes could have a good time. Take it from me. Take it from me. Following the Tao, you accept whatever life brings, and when death comes, you are ready. So purpose, acceptance, humor, and then the last one, heart connection. Heart connection. Very hard for us the last couple of years to keep heart connection with people that we want to, other than those people we live with. Friendships, some of them are just wasting away. We're trying to keep them going. How can we keep them going? And we thought we finally had a respite in the summer, and then the Delta virus came along. Human beings need heart connection. We can't die to our worries and our fears and our loneliness without heart connection. So this is our kind of our practice now, how to find heart connection. Group of us here today. That's wonderful. A group of you guys online, that's wonderful. But many of us are starved just for simple emotional connection with others. Now, some of you are introverts and you don't care. But if you live by yourself, even if you're an introvert, you probably care. You probably care. It's probably helpful. So I counsel a lot of people at Sense Center, and I'm always counseling them to take a risk and reach out to someone. You might get turned down. Just reach out. You're going to get turned down maybe 3 out of 4 times. Okay, you keep reaching out. You need heart connection to feel alive. And if you feel alive, then you die to all this crud that just builds up and overwhelms you. So heart connection and trying to open up to people in the other tribe. They are weird. Whatever your tribe is and whatever their tribe is. They're weird. How could they believe such and such? How could they be so prejudiced against such and such? Didn't they take science in school? You know, weird. Well, they're suffering in the same way we are. They're thinking we're weird too. The more tribal we get, the more hard it is to manifest what Fatsang was trying to show the Empress Wu. So near-death experiences. Mary, my cousin, had a near-death experience. After that, there's a lot of research. Most people have different stances toward death. Here's someone who said, and this is one of dozens I've read over the years, my heart opened as wide as the sky and all my cares fell away. Kenneth Ring, who's written 2 of the more recent books about near-death experiences. I read the early ones, Ralph Moody and people like that. Kenneth Ring says that from his research, if more people had NDEs, near-death experiences, right, or could learn about them and absorb their wisdom, the world would be a better place. So this practice of ours gives us a chance to peek at something beyond the small limitations of our life and experience a sense of connectedness and even love that is more than understanding. So my friend, whom I'll call Kay, years ago in San Francisco Zen Center, Kay came from another state and went to San Francisco Zen Center to do a retreat there. She looked across, she told me this afterwards. She said, I looked across the room at Suzuki, my teacher, my first teacher. She said, I looked toward him and I looked in his eyes and there was no one there. There was no one there. And then there was no one here either. And there was just, I don't know what it was. It was wonderful. It was like death, but also it was like a spring of love for everyone and everything gushing forth. That's what Fa Sang is teaching the Empress Wu when he does all these mirrors. In his own way. The Empress Wu doesn't want to meditate. Chinese, certainly Chinese dignitary never meditates. So, in talks I've given before, I talk about Shakespeare as a coward dies 1,000 times before his death, but the valiant taste of death but once. So, how can we die to this junk that we carry around? By going right into our fear and disempowering it, then we don't have to die 1,000 times before death. Anytime we're really afraid of something that's really going to get us, can we go into it with love and affection and openness and no cerebral activity at all? Maybe a little bit of cerebral activity. We can do that. We can do that. And when we're ready to die, just once. That's Shakespeare. But then when I talk about this, and I don't know if I do this in one of my books or not, I also reverse it. I say the valiant die 1,000 times before their death, but the coward dies before. So we learn how to die to all these fears, one after another, because they're still coming in. You think they don't come in after practicing for 84 years? They still come in. We learn how to breathe and just breathe through them, see that they're just impressions in a movie, die to them. And then when we're ready to die, we can just not that much different. That just. So I'd like to read again the entire thing, and I'll see what time is it. What time is it?
10:35.
Oh, okay. I'll read the entire thing and see if you have comments or questions about anything outside or anything about aging or anything at all. The 10,000 things arise together. In their arising is their declining. They flower or can return to their root. Returning to the root is serenity, not stumbling in confusion and sorrow. When you realize who you are, you accept what is, patient, amused, and embracing, dignified as a king. Following the Tao, you accept whatever life brings. And when death comes, you are ready. Happy to see all of you here today. And I know I can just see a little bit of some of you online. Happy to see you too. I think I'd like to get anybody who's online, give them the privilege of asking a question or making a comment first, and then turn to the folks in the room. Questions, comments? Folks who are online, let's see how many of you are online. Can you see, Jeremy?
About 30.
About 30. Okay.
Well,
Hi, you guys. Any questions or comments?
I have a question, Tim. Can you hear me?
Hi, Judy. Sure.
This is Judy. For me, fear of things coming up in my life is that fear of death. Just being fearful, and how to get present. You know, when I'm feeling really anxious about something, just how to get present in the midst of that. I mean, experience the fear, but then get present and not live there. That, you know, that's. I'd appreciate a comment about that.
Well, that is your practice, isn't it? How to get present.
Yeah.
How to come back and be present with it. How to breathe through it. And there are different strategies, but ultimately all the strategies amount to just doing exactly what you said. And you know, it depends so much on what it is. If it's something that's haunted you before, because we get haunted by these things, can you recognize it and say, oh, there you are again? There you are again. And can you maybe even recognize it in good humor, because you have run that movie 32,000 times, and there it is again. There it is again. And is it possible just to give it a belly laugh, or if not give it a belly laugh, just say, oh, you're just a movie. Oh, you're just this same scene. That's one. And of course, if it's a new fear, then how can you use your beginner's mind to explore that fear? How can you say, I want to learn about that, not so much cognitively, but I want to explore. I want to take a risk and take the courage to explore what's going on in my body. What are the thoughts related to the fear? By going into it, I'm able to deconstruct it. So there's the habitual fears. there's the newer fears, and then there's just being present. But just being present sometimes seems impossible. That's why strategies are really good. And sometimes repeating something yourself is really good. There you are again. There you are again. Or just whatever. And you have to discover. You can use your own, as I've talked lots of times, your own little phrases to remind you. I used to give talks many, many years ago in that Zendo there. I was going to say this Zendo, in that Zendo. And when I got in front of the room, and just before I came in, my heart would start beating fast. And I would just say, I would breathe through it, say, there you are again, and not judge it. And it dissipated. Everything, since there's an ebb and flow for everything dissipates sooner or later. So that's my kind of rambling answer, Judy. Are you still there, Judy? Oh, too much of a rambling answer. She rambled on.
Yes, she is.
No, I was on mute.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Anybody else? Online. Anybody else altogether? Roger.
What about radical acceptance? That's a great topic. We could go on forever, I guess. But what about radical acceptance in the workplace? As it happened, my brother, my sister, and I all fought in the workplace for things we thought were wrong. And I bet people in this room have to face that. At work, this is something wrong with how this institution operates. So I'll just stop there at the question.
Let's see. So I have a little trouble understanding it because of the mask. But you're saying when you were in the workplace, lots of times. Say this, Roger. I just have trouble because of your mask.
Rephrase it, Wilson.
Pardon?
At work, if the let's say the boss at work is doing things that maybe are unethical,
Yeah.
you always radically accept at work when you don't have power, but you feel power is not operating ethically.
Yeah. Well, that's very difficult. When there's a power differential, extreme power differential, and someone is doing something that really disturbs you, that's very hard. But yeah, I think you have to radically accept it. Doesn't mean becoming a doormat. It might mean leaving the place of work. It might mean talking to the person's supervisor, sneaking in and talking to the dean. So radical acceptance is not, again, what we think of as stoicism. There are things we can't change, but if someone's hurting someone with more power is hurting someone with less power, our bodhisattva inclination is we're going to do something. We may not be able to change it, but we're going to do something. Because not only they're hurting me, they're hurting everybody. So we just do it. So, just do it. We try to be strategic, but we do it. What's that, Roger? Katie.
I read an interview recently where the person was saying that fear of death makes us cling to our beliefs more strongly. And there are so many threats in the world right now that's part of why we're becoming so divisive, is because we're fearing death.
Yes.
So maybe by facing this fear of death, we can begin to heal our country.
Yes. Well, I agree with you. So, it was my fear of death when I was 20 years old from reading these existentialists. Why did I spend all my time on existentialists? I mean, I quit going to classes in a very expensive university and just read the existentialists and got haunted by death. And that's why I'm here. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't gone through that. I wouldn't have done that stuff. So fear of death can propel us, but it can also freeze us, or it can make us fall or run away. Yeah, but it's an opportunity. I know I say that so much that everybody just tired of me saying it. It's a cliche, it's an opportunity, but it is. Yeah, either of you.
Sorry. In hearing your story, Tim, and reading this last stanza, there's actually a movie that comes to mind that I've seen before. It's A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood with Mr.
Yeah.
Rogers.
Yeah.
And he's a man who spent his lifetime teaching kids how to become adults, but there's a lovely line in that movie that he once said that comes to mind this. He said, death is something that we all have a hard time talking about, but death is a part of being human. And
is it what?
Death is a part of being human.
Yeah.
And anything that is human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable is manageable. And so I thought, in giving mention to death is the first step to healing whatever injury the idea of death causes us.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Very well. You're very well.
Thank you. A while ago, there was a lot of people in my life, kind of indirectly, who were dying. People that weren't hitting me directly, but kind of indirectly. And so death was sort of around me, and it felt very heavy to me. And my practice is usually I like to personify things, so I like to put a face to death or something, and he can sit, or she or it can sit with me, and so for me, I use this personification of death, and he can sit with me in meditation, and then eventually he doesn't sit with me in meditation. So
when death sits with you, does it have a form?
well, in my head.
Yeah, I know, that's what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, so yeah, for me, as he personified, he'll sit with me, and eventually
That's a wonderful practice. Wonderful practice. Thank you.
because that's how I deal with.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. Carrie.
Thank you so much for talking about this. Death, I feel like is something that's not talked about in our society. It's old age, death. We push it away, we close the doors. And I know for me, from a young age, there came, I remember almost the moment, being very young and realizing my mortality. And that came as a sense of my mom is going to die. I became very fearful of my mom going, dying. And she wasn't at all sick, or there wasn't any circumstances. It was just that this, this idea came into being. So I know that this has been something that has been very present. It comes and goes in my body. This heaviness, this fear, this clinging to who I am, and then that seems like a clinging to my purpose, and that becomes a clinging to the connection of people, and then the loss of that, So I like your idea of personifying death, and because it does, and that's for me, that's what arises, these things, these clinging, these attachments.
Wonderful.
A nice,
Thank
you for.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I want to say something more about heart connection. That's one reason we don't want to take risks in reaching out to people. people, especially in these very, is that we think maybe we'll establish our heart connection. We'll begin to establish it, and then we'll lose it. And then we'll lose it, just like we've lost so many. But as long as we retract, we have no chance to expand. Just have to do that, to reach out, be there for each other, try to work with the people we'd like to love and the people we'd like to get to know and the people we do love. Anything more? Yeah.
I find the humility aspect of what we were talking about, so it really made radical acceptance a lot easier. Because I think when you try to radically accept something without humility, a lot of times I find that frustration naturally arises. And it comes from not knowing, but there's kind of a way you can work. I think I was like working with people on a problem and you don't know what's going to happen or where you're really at with the issue, and you have to make a decision that you can't go back on. And if you can kind of laugh while you're going through those changes, it can make the radical acceptance a lot easier. And it doesn't, because you just know that you don't know what's going to happen. It's just kind of a fun circumstance you're in. And I don't, so I think it becomes kind of contagious and it makes it fun.
Comes kind of what?
Contagious, and and it doesn't, it can make not knowing fun.
Yeah, and of course it becomes contagious in both ways. As soon as we're around someone who's sort of not just more easygoing and light and laughs at their own struggles, we feel lighter. And as soon as we start getting too heavy, I mean, there's a lot of reason to be heavy right now, but we're talking about it, we're feeling heavy, we're saying what's going to happen. We freeze, we fold. So it only takes one deep belly laugh, and there's freedom. There's freedom. And just a little smile is the beginning. Just a little smile. Anything else? What time is it, Jeremy?
10:52.
Oh, time to go.